Hi, it's Drew again from Andover Baptist Church, and welcome to day 3 of this week's 5-day devotional series where we're looking at Jesus was, and today we look at Jesus was a carpenter. Now, we learn this in a couple of books in the New Testament. So, for example, in the book of Matthew, the first book in the New Testament, in chapter 13, verse 55, and in fact, in the book of Mark, chapter 6, verse 3. Jesus is addressing a crowd and they're in such wonder at what he's saying, but they turn to each other and they say, "Isn't this the carpenter's son? And isn't this the carpenter?" So in that moment, historically, it's captured for us that Jesus, growing up, before he took up his ministry, had probably followed his earthly father's occupation and had become a carpenter. I think that's incredible. You know, there's nowhere in all 66 books of the Bible that describes what Jesus looked like. We have no idea. He was 6'2" with blonde hair and blue eyes. In fact, he was probably sallow skin, brown eyes and dark hair, given he was from the Middle East. But even that's just a guess. Even in the book of Isaiah, an Old Testament prophet who foretold the coming of Jesus with so much accuracy and detail, even though it was several hundred years before Jesus walked this earth, he says in that book of Isaiah in chapter 53 verse 2 within it, he says, "No beauty or majesty to attract him to us." So we really have no idea what he looked like, how he was built. There's nothing there. However, let's look at a famous story in the Bible around Jesus turning over tables in the temple of Jerusalem. It's in the book of Matthew and it's chapter 21 verses 12 and 13. Let me read them to you. "Then Jesus went into the temple of God and drove out all those who bought and sold in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he said to them, 'It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves.'" Jesus really kicked off. He was clearly very upset at how the temple was being used. But why was he simply not pushed aside, this meek and mild Jesus of Nazareth? Well, Jesus showed meekness and mildness in dealing with people often, but this story clearly affirms that he was far from timid. And the fact that no one simply pushed him away suggests to me he was possibly quite an intimidating or physically well-built individual. Well, after all, up until 2 or 3 years before this event, he had grown up working as a carpenter. Back in those days, the building and the materials they used would probably suggest that he was physically quite strong through his work. But why is this relevant to us today? Well, I have a friend who's a carpenter, and to think that Jesus had such a skilled and honest profession, trade, makes him more realistic and more in tune with the masses today. He wasn't a king or a prince aloof from us. He was one of us. And just like the friend I have as a carpenter, I know that you and I also have a friend in Jesus. Thank you for listening today. The song I'll leave you with is from the famous country and western singer Johnny Cash. And guess what it's called? It's called "Jesus Was a Carpenter." Thank you, and see you tomorrow.